Okay, hello everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Um, Today's video is on virtue epistemology. We're almost done. The next video is on social epistemology, and then some applications thereof. Um, and so yeah, you're almost finished. Isn't that fun? Um, so we'll try to get through this, in a relatively timely fashion, and there you go. All right. Um. Okay. So virtue epistemology. Let's start by providing a little context. Um. Virtue epistemology arises originally out of a kind of reliabilism called process reliabilism. Reliabilism is, of course, as having been touched on in previous videos, reliabilism is one theory about how beliefs get justified. Um, so it feeds into more or less the JTB model of knowledge, the justified true belief model of knowledge. Um, in uh, process reliabilism, the idea, the basic idea, is, and process reliabilism is sort of the default version of it. Um, the idea is that if you get a belief, uh, if you get a belief from a mechanism, a belief forming mechanism that is usually uh, reliable, that reliably gives you true beliefs, then the belief is justified. Um, and as we talked about in a previous video, this has some advantages over internalism because it deals with objective facts about the relationship the knower stands in with regard to the external world and the objective truth about the processes through which the knower is forming beliefs. But it also has some weirdness to it because it seems as though um, it seems as though you can wind up being forming justifying it in forming beliefs in situations where it seems intuitively like you shouldn't be. Like again, if I have a magic 8 ball that is truly magic and gives true beliefs, objectively speaking, it is a reliable belief formation mechanism. And even if I don't know that about it, like I've never used it before, I just pick it up, ask it a question, shake it, and look at it. If I were to choose to form a belief, if I were to choose to believe the result that it gave me, um, I would be justified according to process reliabilism because it is, in fact, a reliable belief formation process. Even though intuitively, because I don't know that it's reliable, it seems like I shouldn't be justified. Or the process reliabilists explain this by drawing a distinction between being justified and thinking that you're justified, um, which is a distinction that the internalists have trouble making. Um, the process reliabilists say, hey, in an ideal world, in an ideal epischemic situation, we will have correct information about which processes are reliable and which processes aren't reliable. Um, so it's certainly possible to be in a state of ignorance about which processes are reliable and which aren't, and therefore to be confused about whether you're justified or not in holding certain beliefs. You can think you're justified in holding certain beliefs and not be. You can fail to realize that you would be justified in holding certain beliefs uh, if you were to actually form a belief on the basis of those mechanisms. Okay. So that's the context we're coming from. Virtue epistemology is I may get in trouble with people who really do epistemology for this, but whatever, I don't care. They can come at me. Come get me. Um, Virtue epistemology strikes me as a way of trying to render a kind of reliabilism that is still internalist to a large degree. That you have internal access to the reasons for thinking you are justified, but these reasons don't take the form of uh, propositions that form the premises of an argument, wherein your belief is the conclusion, which is the classic form of internalism. Rather, uh, this form of internalism is more like an internalist variety of reliabilism, where uh, your reasons that you have access to for thinking you are justified in forming a given belief uh, are because you got them through certain processes, through certain belief forming mechanisms that you know to be reliable, um, and that there must be that sort of internal awareness of them. Um, that the mechanisms are not like the mechanisms are virtues of you. They are positive traits that you have. Um, they're uh, epistemically positive traits that you have. Okay, so that's the general overview there. So let's drill down into this a little bit in what the reading gives us to work with and talk about um, some of the permutations of this idea. So the original form of virtue epistemology, or virtue epistemology as it was proposed in its original form, is commonly known as virtue reliabilism, which befits the fact that it is an attempt to sort of give us the best of both worlds with a kind of internalism and a kind of reliabilism. Okay, so virtue reliabilism. And the idea with virtue reliabilism is that you have certain characteristics, certain virtues, that are epistemically relevant virtues. Um, like your memory, um, your these are your cognitive capabilities, like your memory, your well functioning ability to put together information, things like that. Um, I am aware that my mind functions uh, in has certain functions that it executes well, and if my beliefs are based on those capacities, those intellectual capacities, uh, those virtues, then I should have confidence that my beliefs are true. In other words, I should feel justified. So the reliabilism part comes in reference to a process by which your beliefs are formed. Uh, we're not talking about premises. We're not talking about reasons in the sense of argumentative reasons. We're talking about reasons in the sense of the reason I have to believe this is because it was formed through a reliable process. Um, and it is a virtue, reliabilism, in the sense that these reliable processes are not like external to the world. They're not pure brute force biological things like my visual acuity or things like that. They are cognitive capabilities. I can form a belief that my car is parked outside based on the fact that I know my memory works pretty well. And I have a distinct memory of having seen my car outside very recently. So, because I know that the this cognitive capability I have of memory is reliable, I am justified, and because it is reliable. Um, I can form a belief based on my cognitive capacities with regard to putting information together. Um, if I hear a noise and I look over and I see that something that was on the table is now lying on the floor, and I see the cat scurrying away, I can form a belief that the cat knocked it over and is now running away. Um, because of that. And that belief was formed by a reliable cognitive capacity. For most things, my ability to put two and two together works pretty damn well. I'm not like a super detective or anything, but I do okay for myself. And that's not a super complicated situation. So, I have the ability to, observe my environment and in everyday situations make reasonable conclusions about what happened and be confident that I'm right about those things. Um, and because I know that that is a reliable process, I am justified. Okay. So there's an element of internalism there, um, because I do need to know, I need to be aware of my cognitive capabilities and their reliable nature. Um, uh, but we are not going fully internalist in the sense of having to articulate like premises, reasons in the propositional sense for thinking my belief is true. So why would we want to be virtue reliabilists? Well, one reason is that it dodges a lot of the worst elements of both. It dodges a lot of the worst elements of both externalism and internalism. It dodges entirely the regress issue of internalism because because the the internalist character of this way of thinking about justification is all about awareness of my reliable cognitive capabilities. um, I don't have to worry about this idea of I don't have to worry about this idea that uh, my belief that my belief that A is based on my belief that B, my belief that B is based on my belief that C, my belief that C is based on my belief that D, etc., etc. So I don't need to worry about that. So I avoid the regress problem, and I avoid, therefore, some of the moves that internalists make when trying to fix the regress problem. I avoid having to assert that some beliefs are self-justifying or basic in some sense. And I'm not saying that the idea of basic beliefs is implausible, but I mean, even if we think that the basic belief concept isn't totally implausible, it's nice to not have to worry about that. It's one less thing, you know. It is a challenge, and we don't have to take that on if we are virtue reliabilists. Um, we can just point at the process and go, the process is reliable. I'm aware that the process is reliable, so I have all the justification I need to believe this thing that this idea that I got as a result of the process. Um, and it has the best aspects of externalism and reliabilism in particular, because there is an objective fact about whether I'm justified, and I there's an objective, describable fact about why I am justified that doesn't require me to be very subjective about it, which is a problem for some kinds of internalism. That, like, if I can articulate reasons that make sense to me, I'm justified, maybe, in some ways of thinking about internalist justification, and that can that can become troubling because you can, in theory, have someone who can articulate reasons to believe something that makes sense within a certain paradigm, but which are all wrong, right? Which are all wrong, and they're still justified in having these untrue beliefs. And that makes epistemologists uncomfortable. Um, some of them, anyway. We talk about that when we talk about, like, the thing with the medieval scientist and so on and so forth. Um, so, because this is a reliabilist view, I don't have to worry about that. I just it's objectively true that my memory, my ability to, put together evidence and evaluate it. It's objectively true that these cognitive capabilities are or are not reliable. Um, and and so there's an objective fact about whether or not I am justified. So that's nice. That's a good thing. Um, and it also means that we dodge weird stuff like the match gate ball, the truly match gate ball, because not just any reliable information vector, basically, not just any reliable process is going to confer justification. Uh, this is virtue reliabilism. So the reliable processes that can confer justification for a belief are restricted to those cognitive capabilities, those mental virtues. Um, and so if I picked up the magic 8 ball and shook it and got a true answer from it, I would not be justified in believing it because no matter how reliable the truly magic 8 ball is, it's not a cognitive virtue and therefore is not one of the reliable processes that can confer justification on this view. Okay, so that is virtue reliabilism. And you can see how it develops, how it might be articulated as a move to try and clean up some of the sticky points about purely externalist reliabilism and also to dodge some of the worst woolly-headed notions that come out of internalism. Okay. Okay, so basically, so our first, at a first pass, virtue epistemology seems to be telling us that uh, we get knowledge when we form beliefs based on uh, cognitive virtues, that the capacity, our thinking abilities that are reliable for forming beliefs. And that's, I mean, that doesn't seem like a terrible idea. We've taken the idea of reliabilism and we've narrowed it down to a kind of mental reliabilism. The reliabilism of hello Galena. The reliabilism of the knower. Is the knower reliable? Not just is the knower interacting with some kind of external reliable process, but is the knower is the knower themselves? Ugh, horrible. Uh, is the knower equipped with reliable faculties? All right, and there's something enticing about that because knowledge is a matter of brain. See, I said something smart. Knowledge is a matter of brain. When you go home today and your parents or your loved one or your children ask you, what did you learn in college today? You can say, knowledge is a matter of brain. Uh, what? I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm amazing. I'm telling them smart stuff like knowledge is a matter of brain. Yeah, yeah. They gave me a doctorate. Um, anyway, knowledge is a matter of the operation of the brain, uh, in theory. So it seems like focusing our search for what justifies beliefs on how well the brain operates isn't completely bonkers. That's a reasonable thing to do. Okay. That said, some people have felt that virtue reliabilism is a little bit too narrow. That there are other mental capacities aside from just like there are other mental capacities that impact uh, how how much confidence we should have in a belief that we've formed, how likely it is that that belief is true, um, that aren't just sort of like, how to put this, that aren't just sort of like basic capacities that you either have or you don't, right? Like, although some people say you can train your memory, and maybe there's a little truth to that, generally speaking, people have the memory capacity they have, right? You've got what you've got. Um, maybe you're really good with faces and terrible with names. Maybe your memory is good in your 20s, and then as you get to be, I don't know, 50, to pull a number out of thin air, your memory for details starts to go down. Maybe your memory for details was never good to begin with, and the fact that it is now degrading uh, at the age of 50 is truly troublesome. Whatever. The point being, these kind of faculties that virtue reliabilism in the realm of virtue epistemology, the kind of faculties that virtue reliabilism is interested in are pretty much faculties that are sort of brute the basic operational capacities of your brain, uh, what it can do, right? Um, I like to think of it in a similar sense to like reflexes. Some people have good reflexes, some people have bad reflexes. And it's still okay to call good reflexes a virtue in the sense that having good reflexes is a positive trait of a person, but it's a virtue that is sort of outside of your control, right? Um, there is some degree of training that you can do to improve your reaction time and things like that, but for the most part, you've got what you've got. Um, and whether or not you're successful in that training really depends a lot on what you were starting with. Um, I mean, the classic case here is with like to get away from reflexes and but to go somewhere kind of similar is short distance runners. Um, Obviously, runners train and they practice and they do a lot of stuff like that, but ultimately, how much good that training does you in terms of short distance running uh, is ultimately down to genetics. Because short distance runners, the really successful ones, have a different have an unusually high density of fast twitch muscles, and that's just something you have or you don't have. You can't develop them. You've got them or you don't. If you've got the biological setup to be a really successful short distance runner, then you've got it. You train in order to realize your innate capacity, but if you don't have that unusually high density of fast twitch muscles, you can train your ass off all you want and you will never be a top level short distance runner. It just won't happen because you literally lack the physical capabilities. So those intellectual virtues that virtue reliabilism is interested in are kind of like that. They're almost innate. You can train in order to learn how to use them effectively, but that's about it. And some people have felt that's not a completely accurate representation of how we should be thinking about virtue epistemology and how we form beliefs um, and sort of how we should approach that. So that brings us to the modification of the basic virtue epistemology position, what is now called virtue responsibilism. Ooh. Virtue responsibilism emphasizes the agency of the knower, the activity of the knower, right? Um, and this is sort of a new approach because, like with empiricism, empiricism says all knowledge begins with sort of elemental beliefs based on sense knowledge. I see something colored red. I instinctively and without having to think about it form the belief I am seeing something red, and and that's the base level of belief that everything else builds on. Those kinds of beliefs, and that is a that doesn't have anything to do with my agency. Um, that's a biological process, and then epistemic involuntarism. If I see something red, I can't help but form the belief uh, I'm seeing something red. It just automatically happens. There's nothing. There's nothing about the agent in there. Similarly, with bog standard externalism, there's absolutely nothing about the agent going on. And even with virtue reliabilism, arguably, if we're just talking about my innate cognitive characteristics, like again, memory, there's no agency going on there, or very little, anyway. Either my memory is reliable or it isn't. I don't. I'm not like deciding to make it reliable or not. Okay. So virtue responsibilism puts the responsibility, bagoosh, on the knower, um, by positing that you are justified in forming your beliefs. You are justified in having a belief if you get that belief through the exercise of epistemic virtues that you have some control over, that aren't just cognitive capabilities, but are epistemic attitudes in a way, or epistemic practices that you can cultivate. Ooh, what the hell would that mean? Well, for instance, um, if I take a reasonably critical stance towards information, like a trust but verify approach, um, then the virtue responsibilist would say that is, I'm behaving in an epistemically virtuous fashion. Um, that my critical approach to new information is epistemically virtuous, and it is being critical, exercising critical thinking, is an epistemic virtue that I can cultivate. I can practice it. I can become a better critical thinker. I can learn how to be a critical thinker, and I can cultivate a habit of being a critical thinker rather than just unconsciously accepting the information that's presented to me. Okay. Um, there are all kinds of epistemic virtues under this view. Things like open-mindedness, balanced against a critical stance, but one that's not too extreme. Um, Respect for expertise. Um, Curiosity would be an epistemic virtue, probably. Um, Fairness and judgment, maybe. Willingness to admit ignorance. Um, Epistemic humility, knowing when you don't know, knowing when you should defer to the expert, things like that. Yeah, these are epistemic virtues under the virtue responsibilist model. And if I practice these virtues, and I am practicing them, and of course, you would have internal access to that. You know when you're practicing the virtues, and you know when you aren't. If I am practicing the epistemic virtues, then the beliefs I form I should be pretty confident in them for the most part. That doesn't mean I'm gonna get everything right. Remember, even in bog standard bog standard reliabilism, even in the just out of the package, off the shelf version of reliabilism, the mechanism does not have to be perfect in order to be reliable. It just needs to be. I don't mean to keep repeating the R word, but it just needs to be reliable. It needs to work pretty well most of the time, get you where you need to go. It can break down occasionally and still be reliable. Um, I'm a pretty reliable person, even though I occasionally, foul up and fail to deliver on something. But I do okay mostly. And I do okay because I am trying to behave in a virtuous fashion. Not for epistemic virtues, but for other ones, like trying to keep my promises and try my best and not take on more than I can reasonably deliver and things like that. Those are virtues related to being reliable, um, and the epistemic virtue situation is just a direct corollary, a directly analogous to the virtue situation in other contexts. If I am genuinely exercising epistemic humility and approaching the world with curiosity and open mindedness, yet also uh, trying to exercise an appropriate level of skepticism and critical reflection on things that I'm presented with, then I should feel confident in the beliefs that I have. Um, so why wouldn't I? I know that I'm doing my best as a knower. I'm trying my best as a knower, and therefore I should feel like, yeah, I'm doing a pretty good job of forming beliefs. They should be largely true beliefs if I'm doing this. Okay. So, virtue, virtue reliabilism really lays heavy into the innate cognitive characteristics thing. It's much more like purely externalist versions of reliabilism, in that it talks about these sort of objective processes that are or aren't reliable. Period. Whereas virtue responsibilism, the second version of virtue epistemology we've talked about, virtue responsibilism really says that if anything is reliable at all, it's the knower themselves, himself, herself, itself, themself, whatever. It is the knower. That if we're going to talk about reliability, we're going to talk about the knower's reliability as a knower. And how should we understand that? We should understand it by looking at epistemic virtues. Virtues that you can be aware of, virtues that you can choose to lean into, virtues that you can practice to become better at, and virtues that you have to actively practice. Epistemic virtue is not something you have, in other words, in this picture, it's something you do. So in virtue reliabilism, epistemic virtues are things you have. In virtue responsibilism, epistemic virtues are things that you do. Okay. Okay. Epistemic responsibilism sounds pretty reasonable, I think. I mean, that seems like a pretty good way of thinking about justification. I feel like instinctively, intuitively, we already kind of hold beliefs like this. We might be less likely to trust someone else, for instance, if we know that they are pig-headed and closed-minded and only listen to a few sources of information and don't critically reflect on the things that those sources of information tell them, and so on and so forth. Um, and therefore, if we think that someone else is not likely to be forming true beliefs, if we think that they are unreliable as knowers, then we should apply the same standard to ourselves and be suspicious of ourselves as knowers if we are not practicing the epistemic virtues. I think even if you haven't, and most of us haven't, even if you haven't sort of explicitly unpacked it in those terms, I think most of us have some sort of vague, fuzzy idea in that direction. Okay. So, virtue epistemology looking pretty good so far, especially the virtue responsibilism uh, approach. Virtue responsibilist accounts have been have been the focus of a lot of work in epistemology in the last 30-ish years. Um, which in Glasky terms, that's positively, just like yesterday. That's super recent work. For the last 30 years, yeah, virtue epistemology, especially of the responsibilist flavor, has gotten a lot of attention, and there's been a lot of sort of chatter about it. A lot of people think it's a very a promising direction for thinking about justification, because it reflects, like I said, our intuitive ideas about how to assess people as knowers, and I think it reflects how we assess our own beliefs, right? For the most part, I think that we assess our own beliefs, especially because, again, as I said in the earlier video, we can't come into contact with the world in itself. We don't ever really know if things are true, for sure true. Uh, but I think if we're like, hey, I did my best, I tried real hard, I did all the things I'm supposed to do, I feel pretty good about this one. I think that's the standard we hold ourselves to. So let's poke at it a little bit and sort of and see if there are any weak points, or just kind of if there's anything interesting that it can tell us about some of the things that have come up with other accounts. Because it would be really cool if we have this new way of thinking about justification. It would be super cool if it like solved a bunch of problems that other accounts of justification can't. All right, so let's start by talking about the biggest problem for all kinds of epistemology of the last half century or so, Gettier problems. Son of a... All right, so I'm not going to go over the Gettier problem thing again. Um, Basically, what Gettier problems pose as a difficulty uh, is the question of luck. Uh, should we Are we forced to accept that sometimes you have to be lucky to get knowledge, or sometimes luck is a major factor in the formation of things that can be called knowledge? Um, because it seems like in a lot of cases um, we think that someone is justified in holding a belief, but it's only pure luck that the belief turned out to be true. And if we don't think we can admit luck into the picture, then that will not be knowledge, even though it is true and it is justified. And son of a bitch, that sucks. And if we're willing to be relaxed about the luck thing, then yeah, we can allow cases like that, but it just seems weird to some people that luck is a factor in having knowledge. So how does virtue epistemology handle Gettier cases? Well, basically, it depends on how intense you want to get about the role that the virtues play. And this is true whether you're a virtue responsibilist or uh, um, a virtue reliabilist. Whatever kind of epistemic virtues you're talking about, innate capacities or capacities that you can develop, whichever ones you're talking about, there's another kind of axis to it. If like innate and voluntary are on the x-axis, the y-axis is how much of a role are they required to play in getting knowledge. Um, and this distinguishes what we call modest versus robust virtue epistemology. Um, And in the modest virtue epistemology picture, uh, in the modest virtue epistemology picture, it's that we say that the knowledge, how to put this, we say that it must arise from, the belief must arise from the exercise of these virtues. It doesn't rule out that other stuff can be evolved. Um, but the epistemic virtues have to play a notable role. The story can't be complete without talking about the epistemic virtues. Why do I have this belief? Um, any story about why you have that belief has to reference your epistemic virtues. That is a modest epistemic virtue account. That is, your belief must arise from the exercise of your epistemic virtues. And of on a modest account of epistemic virtue, luck can be a factor. It absolutely can be. Because the epistemic virtues don't have to account for the entirety of why you have that belief. They just have to be an important part of the story. And if luck is the rest of the story, then so be it. And so Gettier cases are still kind of a live issue with modest accounts of of virtue epistemology. The other end of that y-axis is what we call robust virtue epistemology, which makes a strong claim. The strong claim is that the belief must be because of the epistemic virtues. Not it's just they're involved, that they explain entirely, that you can explain in toto having that belief by reference to the epistemic virtues. And that's the robust epistemic virtue account that makes the strong claim. So robust epistemic virtue rules out luck. Luck does not play a part. Because luck is not an epistemic virtue, and the epistemic virtues tell the whole story of why you have the belief. And so, you can completely dodge Gettier cases. You can say a Gettier case is not an issue for me because it just doesn't count as knowledge. And that's the thing that Gettier cases are pushing on us. They're saying, hey, there's this thing where it's a true belief and it's a justified belief, but it still doesn't seem like it should count as knowledge, and that because intuitively it feels weird to call that knowledge. The epistemic luck people, which in this context would include the modest virtue epistemologist claims, they're like, yeah, it's knowledge. I know that sounds weird, but it is, and because sometimes you get lucky and you have knowledge. Okay. But the robust virtue epistemologists are like, no, it's not knowledge. We were right all along. It sounds weird to call that knowledge, and you're right, because it isn't. Boom. I know it feels justified, and it is true, but it's not knowledge. So that's that's one thing that we might think is positive about virtue epistemology, because if we adopt the robust virtue epistemology model, suddenly Gettier cases are just not a worry, because a belief is only justified when it is entirely explained by the exercise of your epistemic virtues. And in the Gettier case, the belief is not entirely explained by the exercise of your epistemic virtues, so it doesn't count as knowledge. So, I mean, we have satisfied the intuitions that Gettier cases are supposed to vex, and we have kept our epistemic virtue model. So that's a point in its favor. It deals with a classic problem. Okay. Some people think that despite this fact that we should not accept robust virtue epistemology because it has other problems of its own. In the paper, there is the Jenny case, where Jenny is in an unfamiliar city. She asks a local for directions. The person she asks is knowledgeable and reliable. Jenny accepts the directions without performing any additional checks. Her belief is true, and it is informed by the locals' expertise, and so she has gained this knowledge through testimony. That's something we're going to talk about in the social epistemology video. She has gained this knowledge through testimony, or she has gained this belief through testimony. Is it knowledge? Well, some people claim that in the robust virtue epistemology model, it's not knowledge because she doesn't have it she does not have that belief because of her epistemic virtues. She has it because of his epistemic virtues. She asked him, and the fact that he is knowledgeable and reliable and discerning and whatever, the fact that he has epistemic virtues is why she has a true belief. And in fact, we could go even further and say that there are some circumstances, depending on factors like how he presents himself and things like that, where she might even be failing to practice full epistemic virtue if she just believes this bit of information without performing any further verification on her own. So definitely we can't say that this is knowledge, because on a robust virtue epistemology picture, we can't say this is knowledge because it does not meet the strict requirements of robust virtue epistemology, which is that I acquired the belief. Whoa, did my camera go out? It did. Okay, you can still hear me though. Hang on a minute. My camera has been acting weird lately, and I don't like that. I'm going to try something. No, I don't want that. I'm going to try something. We're going to get... Are we back? We're back! Yay! Okay. Anyway, so the... Right, the Jenny case, the testimony case, challenges the robust virtue epistemology model because it seems like she does have knowledge on a gut check, on a general intuition check. It seems like she got knowledge. Come on, man. I am not happy with how... I'm not happy with how my camera is behaving lately. I'm going to try and wrap this up quick then. It seems like she gets knowledge because testimony is a good source of knowledge. It's just... It's how we get a lot of our knowledge. Again, I'll talk about that in the social epistemology video more. It seems like she has knowledge, and yet, because of the super strict requirements of robust virtue epistemology, which says that you have to have a belief, why you have a belief has to be entirely explained by your exercise of epistemic virtue, and that doesn't meet that criteria, then, yeah, it doesn't seem like she has knowledge. Even though intuitively it feels like she does. Now, modest virtue epistemology can accommodate this no problem. Um, Her epistemic virtues play a role, but they do not have to explain everything about why she has that belief, and that's fine. So testimony is no problem. But modest virtue epistemology forces us to accept epistemic luck when it's confronted with gaggier cases, and not everyone's okay with that. So we're on the horns of a dilemma. Robust virtue epistemology deals with gaggier cases in a way that is satisfactory to a lot of people and has trouble dealing with testimony. And exactly the opposite for modest virtue epistemology. The modest one forces us into a minority position with respect to gaggier cases, one that feels weird intuitively, but it deals with testimony in a way that feels very organic and natural. So which one should we accept? Obviously, we're kind of at a weird place there. Which one should we accept? Ah, man, they both have pros and cons, and it's hard to know which one is more, which is the better thing to choose. Me personally, I would be more likely to go with modest virtue epistemology because I'm not that fussed about epistemic luck. I feel like that's okay to think that luck plays a role, and I think that being able to adequately account for testimony is super, super important because we get so much knowledge that way. And I think it really is knowledge. But in either way, it does seem like there is something fundamentally correct about virtue epistemology because it does seem like the exercise of our mental capacities, whether you think it's the innate capacities or the ones that we can cultivate, whether you think it's the innate ones or the ones that we can cultivate, it is, the camera's not working, guys. There it is. Whether you think it's the innate ones or the ones that we can cultivate, it seems hard. It seems like it's difficult to imagine that doesn't have a major role in whether we're justified in holding beliefs, right? It almost feels like anyone who was doing epistemology before virtue epistemology was like missing a hugely obvious idea that obviously the way that we exercise our mental capacities is going to be foundational to whether we are justified in holding a belief or not. And that's just really at the root of virtue epistemology. So it feels like virtue epistemology is a big step forward and a crucial one, like that we've refocused our attention in the debate around justification, that we've refocused our attention on something crucial and central that just hadn't been talked about enough prior to this. Okay, so that's virtue epistemology. I'm going to tap out here, especially because my camera is being a little punk. And I will be back for social epistemology in the near future. Okay, bye. Bye.